Shabbat Shalom. A few weeks ago, one of the kids who always comes up on the bima, and it's my favorite part of the service at the end when the children rush up on the bima, one of the kids comes up on the bima, takes his piece of candy, and he's a 4-year-old, and he looks up at me and he says, "Rabbi, I'm going to be a police officer when I grow up." I say back, well, that's wonderful. You want to protect people, you want to help people. That's a great thing that you want to be a police officer. Maybe you want to become a rabbi when you grow up. And he looks up at me and he says, "Nah." So apparently, whether it is 2017 or whether it is some 3,500 years ago, it's tough to be a rabbi. We are now in the midst of Parashat Korah. And as we have read over the last several weeks, our ancestors are constantly challenging Moses, and they're challenging Moses' leadership and his authority, the decisions he makes. As I said earlier, could you imagine anyone questioning a rabbi's decisions? Luckily, it would never happen around here. So here we are in the midst of Parashat Korach, and you're welcome to turn with me if you will. I'm on page 860 in our Eitz Chaim Chumashim, page 860. And it says here, "Vayikach Korach ben Yitzhar ben Kohat ben Levi." Now often when we go through and we ourselves are just kind of reading through the Torah portion, we'll skip over the genealogies a little bit. But in this case, the genealogies happen to be very important. Now Korach, the son of Yitzhar, the son of Kohat ben Levi, was a Levite. Right? He was a child of Levi, a descendant of Levi. Now why is this significant? Because Moses and Aaron were also descendants of Levi. They were of the Levite tribe, just as Korach is. So here you have Moshe and Aaron, who are the leaders of the Jewish people, descendants of the tribe of Levi. So is Korach, also a descendant of the tribe of Levi. Along with Datan v'Aviram b'nei Eliav v'on ben Pelet b'nei Ruvain. Along with Datan and Aviram, the sons of Eliav, and On, the son of Pelet, descendants of Reuben. Now, what do we know about Reuben? Reuben was the oldest child of Jacob. Reuben was the first of the children. And so one might think that the leader of the Jewish people should come from the tribe of Reuben. After all, we know that biblically and even historically, that the firstborn always got the double portion of inheritance. I keep trying to tell my brother that and my parents that. The firstborn is supposed to get the double inheritance. And they're supposed to be the ones who take over as leaders of the people. So here Datan and Aviram are upset. They're the children of Reuben, and they're not in charge. Moses and Aaron, these Levites, are. And Korach, who is also a descendant of Levi, says, wait a second, I'm a descendant of the Levite tribe just as much as Moses and Aaron are. So you have here Korach and Datan and Aviram, and they rise up against Moshe, together with 250 Israelites, chieftains of the community, chosen in the assembly. Not just anybody. These are Anshe Shem. These are people who have a name. These are men of repute. They combined against Moses and Aaron and said to them, Rav lachem, you have made yourselves too great. Rav lachem, you've made yourselves into a Rav. By the way, Rabbi. Rav lachem, the translation here is you have gone too far. For all the community are holy, all of them, and the Lord is in their midst. Ki kol ha'eda kulam kedoshim. Right, all of them, and the Lord is in their midst. Why then do you raise yourself above the Lord's congregation? It seems based on the pshat, based on a basic reading of the text, that Korach, that Datan and Aviram, they're challenging Moshe, they're challenging Aaron. And they're saying in Shemot, earlier in Exodus, when God led us out of Egypt, and God gave us the Torah, God said to the entire people that you shall be a mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadash, you shall be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Each of us, all of us are to be holy. Each of us, all of us have a special relationship with God. Each of us, all of us are seeking to understand what it is that God wants of us in our time. Who are you, Moses, to put yourself as a leader above all these people? And based on the basic reading of the text, we Americans, we who live in a democracy, might agree. Well, that kind of makes sense. We believe in the power of the people. We believe that all of us should have a voice in how decisions are made. Isn't that, after all, the democratic way? Now we come to find out in our parashah that not only do Korach and Datan and Aviram, not only do they lose and the 250 followers who came after them, not only does God affirm Moses' leadership, but God causes the earth to open up and swallows all of those who would rebel against Moses and his rabbinic leadership. God's self got involved and showed the entire people of Israel who was supposed to be in charge. Yes, all of us are a kingdom of priests. All of us are a holy nation. But at the end of the day, our Torah teaches us someone has to be in charge. Now, fast forward to today. And just after lunch, I'd like to invite everybody to join with me for a conversation about intermarriage. An ongoing conversation, as I'm sure many of you, like me, have been keeping up. The Forward magazine has all of a sudden found an agenda again. And here they are, day after day, bringing forth articles of conservative rabbis wrestling with the question of intermarriage. In 2017, should conservative rabbis be allowed to do intermarriage? Should we take a survey? Do we take a vote and do we ask the congregation? Is that how these decisions should be made? Is that how leaders, is that how decisions of Jewish leadership ought to be made? We simply survey a congregation and say, well, what do you think? How do you feel? And as our rabbis teach, the majority get to decide. Is that how these decisions ought to be made? In many ways, that's how the Reform movement makes its decisions. The Reform movement, as we know it here in America, came to be a little more than a century ago. And ultimately, as it evolved over the century, it came to rest on this idea that we're a Mamlechet Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh, that if each of us are supposed to be part of this kingdom of priests and a holy nation, then each of us have the opportunity for ourselves to decide what is right and wrong, what is Jewish and what is un-Jewish, what is kosher, as it were, and what is not kosher. And the Reform movement more than a century ago, following the lead of a man named Rabbi Kaufman Kohler, who was actually a rabbi at Temple Bethel. I'm pointing as if it were up the road then, and it was down the road that way. Right? At our Temple Bethel. In 1885, in the Pittsburgh Platform, they came to reject any traditional definitions of holiness. They say it doesn't matter what you wear. You don't need a tallis, you don't need a kippah to be religious. You don't need to observe the laws of family purity to be religious. And they cast out that which felt un-American, that which felt unmodern, and said, we have an ability for ourselves to choose what is holy. We can choose for ourselves what is right. We can choose for ourselves how we express our relationship with God. Well, after some time, a group of people got frustrated and got disappointed, frankly, with the Reform movement's choices, how far to the left the movement had gone. And they said, wait, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You can't get rid of all of that which we know is Jewish ritual in the name of modernity. And that group of people broke off from the Reform movement and said, we are seeking to conserve Jewish tradition. We are seeking to conserve Jewish ritual. Thus was born the conservative movement. And that's why we're known today as conservative Jews. We believe in this idea of modernity, but we also believe in a commitment to tradition, a commitment to halakha, a process of determining how modernity affects Jewish tradition. And as I believe the conservative movement has worked over the last century, as I understand through my studies, what is conservative Judaism? It's a conversation. It's a conversation between those whom Solomon Schechter referred to as Catholic Israel. A strange phrase for us, I know. But Catholic Israel are those committed conservative Jews, those who come to shul, those who are making Jewish choices in their everyday lives. And as I understand the conservative movement, it is a conversation, it's a process, a dialogue between that group of Jews, those who are making a concerted commitment to be conservative, with rabbis of a conservative perspective. The rabbis representing tradition, the populace representing a commitment to modernity but a respect for tradition. And ultimately what we have come to see, the result of that conversation has become something in the middle. And frankly, conservative Judaism has taken pride over the last century in being that something in the middle. It says very clearly in the Torah that there should be no fire. When you turn your car on to come to shul on Shabbat, what are you doing? Creating a spark, right? You're turning the ignition on, you're creating a spark. You're creating fire in direct contradiction to what the Torah says. But some 67 years ago or so, under the leadership of our rabbi of blessed memory, Rabbi Morris Adler, he said, let's come to a compromise. The Jewish people want to drive on Shabbos. They're living too far away from the synagogue to always be a neighborhood shul. But the Torah says no spark on Shabbos. Let's make a compromise. You can drive to shul on Shabbat, but only to shul. You can't then go from here to the country club. You can't then go from here to the mall. You can't then go from here to somebody else's house down the road. You can only drive to and from shul on Shabbat. And now don't tell anyone, but what the tshuva actually says is you have to drive to the closest synagogue too. You can't drive by 5 synagogues to get to the one you really want to go to, though I think there's an asterisk in there that says unless it's Shaarey Zedek. Then you're welcome to do so. And so as we look at the way that conservative movement has evolved over time, the rabbis barred us from drinking any non-kosher wine, any wine that non-Jews may have had anything to do with, including pouring. The tradition of our people has said it's not kosher, you can't drink it at all. But the conservative movement has said, wait, we live in America and we want to be able to drink wine with our non-Jewish friends. We want to be able to take part in modernity. And so the conservative movement said, let's create a compromise. The rabbis and Catholic Israel came together and said, let's create a compromise. You can drink non-kosher wine. But if you're going to make a bracha over it, and especially if you're going to use it on Shabbat to make a bracha, then it ought to be kosher. Then it should be kosher. And by the way, that tshuva, that responsum also says not only should it be kosher, but preferably it should be Israeli, because we support Israel. And in this way, over the last century, we've sought this compromise. Now, the exception to that idea of compromise, that exception to this idea of conversation, has come in just a few areas. I'm forbidden as a conservative rabbi from performing a wedding for a woman who had been previously married and had not gotten a get. Gotten a get, I like that phrase, right? Not obtained an official Jewish divorce. I'm forbidden, at risk of being expelled from the conservative movement, if I do a wedding for a woman who was married before and had not gotten a get. I'm at risk of being expelled from the conservative movement if I recognize patrilineal descent. Right? We know in the 1980s that the Reform movement ultimately came to say that you're Jewish if your mother is Jewish or if your father is Jewish and you were raised as a Jew. And in response to that, the conservative movement said, absolutely not. We're affirming to the 2,000-year-old, probably closer to 2,500-year-old Jewish custom of recognizing as Jewish only those who are descended from a Jewish woman. And so if we were to hear on our bima have a bar mitzvah of a patrilineal descent Jew, I can be kicked out of the movement. And then, of course, intermarriage. Even in 2017, when I believe the statistics say from 2005 to 2013, give or take, something like that, 70% of marriages were intermarriages. 70% of marriages were intermarriages. If I were to perform any one of those, if I were to perform an intermarriage, and even if I were to attend an intermarriage, I'd be kicked out of the movement. I can't show up to the party. I'd be kicked out of the movement. What do we do with that? We live in a day and age of declining Jewish practice. We live in a day and age of declining Jewish participation. We live in a day and age of declining synagogue membership. What do you want from your rabbi? What do you want from your rabbis? What is our role to you? Are we supposed to be the ones who say no for the sake of preserving the Jewish people? Do you want us to be the ones to say no when you know it's something that we should say no to? Do you want the role of the rabbi to be one of blessing, of visiting in the hospital and calling when someone's not doing well, or offering a birthday or anniversary blessing on the bima, sort of a functionary in that way, a representative of God, if you will, bringing blessing? Is that what you want from your rabbi? Do you want your rabbi to speak out on issues of the day, affecting the Jewish community, affecting Jewish values? As we wrestle with this question of intermarriage in 2017, and once again I invite everyone to join with me for the conversation after lunch, we're called upon to ask today, what is the role of a rabbi for 21st century Judaism? What is the role of the rabbi for 21st century Jews? What do you need from your rabbi? And what do you want from your rabbi? 3,500 years ago it was very clear. The rabbi was the final arbiter of the Jewish people. And over the years that began to evolve first into community rabbis and then into congregational rabbis, being the final arbiter of that which is not only good for Jews, but that which is good for Judaism. So that when people like Korach, when Datan and Abiram challenged Moses, God said, yes, you're all holy people, but there has to be someone more learned than everyone else to make the final decision. And when it comes back to our Torah portion, God and Moses weren't arguing with the idea that we're all supposed to be Mamlechet Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh. They weren't taking back what God had originally said, that all of us are supposed to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Why were Korach and Datan and Abiram, their followers, swallowed up by the earth? Ultimately, our tradition says it's because they weren't bringing a challenge to tradition based on the idea of holiness. For them, it was about ego. For them, it was about jealousy. For them, it was about living for today and not thinking about tomorrow. Friends, we live in difficult times. We live in a time when the very essence of conservative Judaism, that conversation between Catholic Israel and the conservative rabbi, is being challenged. It's time we start having some serious conversations about what does it mean to be a rabbi? What does it mean to be a Jew in 21st century America? I'm honored to share in these conversations with you. May God bless us with wisdom. May God bless us with strength. May God bless us with vision, that we may work each and every day not only to sustain the Jewish people, but to sustain Judaism. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will, and let us say together, Amen.